seat belts and child restraints are required when driving.
If we see someone driving along without their seatbelt on or not wearing their seatbelt correctly, so if they've got it underneath their arm or not properly across their lap, we stop them and issue them a fine. If it's just one person in the vehicle, it's a $500 fine. If the person is over the age of 16, they can be issued an infringement notice. Not only did the passenger get an infringement, but also the driver gets an infringement.
It's important that we consider child safety when travelling in a vehicle. Child car restraints actually protect a child and reduce the risk of serious injury and possibly death in an accident. And therefore it's important to make sure that you not only use child car restraints, but they're adjusted correctly according to the child's size, weight and age. There are 3 stages of child car restraints for use in Australia.
Restraining a child in a car, stage 1. Generally the centre is the safest place in the car. A stage 1 restraint, or rearward facing restraint, is suitable for a child till a minimum of 6 months. The base is secured in through a seat belt, and the child, which is restrained in the carrier then slots into the base. The whole combination being restrained by a secondary point called a tether strap. An alternative to just a stage 1 fitting restraint is a convertible restraint. These do both stage 1 and 2. Generally, most of these will have a higher maximum weight limit for a stage 1 position. Stage 2. This is a forward-facing restraint. It'll take a child from a minimum of 6 months to 4 years of age. It has an inbuilt harness, which is the most important part. Stage 3. This is for a child between the ages of 4 and 7. Some of the seats combine an upper tether strap, but they all will use a seat belt wrapped around both the restraint and the child. You should always ensure that the sash guide is at the correct level for the child's shoulder, and some even have an anti-slide guard to prevent them from slipping out underneath the lap part of the seat belt.
If a child's not in the proper seat or the proper child restraint or booster seat, they'll also be issued a $500 fine for each child that is unrestrained, and the same as with seatbelts, it's an extra $100 on top of the $500 for every subsequent child that's not wearing their seatbelt.
Is it important to ensure that your child's appropriately restrained for their age group, but it's important that you use your child car restraint for as long as possible. So just because they have a birthday doesn't mean that it's time to progress them to the next stage. Check how they're positioned in the restraint before then choosing which next restraint to use. Middle seating position of the rear seat is the safest position for positioning a child car restraint. It is also important that children under 7 never ride in the front passenger seat of a vehicle that has 2 or more rows of seats. It is not only against the law, but can also put them at an increased risk of injury in an accident. It's important to know the history of the restraint that you're using. So if you are choosing second-hand restraints or you're getting a restraint from a friend, make sure that you know the history of it. It's important that all child car restraints are under 10 years of age, that they've never been involved in an accident, and then there's no obvious signs of wear and tear on the restraint that may show that it might not support a child in an accident. In particular, the restraint that I have my hand on here is well over 20 years old now and actually has an old securing system for holding the baby in place, and this type of restraint should never be used. All restraints sold and used in Australia must meet the Australian standard for child car restraints. If it doesn't have this sticker, or you cannot determine whether it meets the Australian standards or not, the seat should not be used.
Traffic crash and you're not properly restrained, then the child can be thrown through the window or hit the back of the headrest, and it can cause severe injuries.